Hey, what's up, nerds? Paul at Radio Free Hammer Hall, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Slaves to Darkness and Nurgle, and looking at that from both directions, whether that's running Nurgle allies in Slaves to Darkness or Slaves to Darkness units marked Nurgle in a Nurgle army. What I'm not going to be talking about is like Slaves to Darkness Nurgle in a Slaves to Darkness army. Um, I don't want to get too into the weeds on that. I don't have the book in front of me, so I don't know enough to really give advice about that in particular. But going from the Maggotkin book allying stuff in to Slaves to Darkness when you're heavy Nurgle, and bringing Slaves to Darkness units that can be marked Nurgle into the Maggotkin book, that I can talk about. So the direction I think I'll start in is what Maggotkin units work well as allies in Slaves to Darkness. The first one that popped into my head is the Lord of Blights, who often feels out of place or like just attacks in your Maggotkin army. I think he works really well in Slaves to Darkness in bolstering Anvil units. So he's great on giving extra defensive ability to your Marauder units and making hyper anvils out of your Chaos Warriors. He's going to be adding, if the unit is more than 20 models, -1 to hit in melee, -2 to hit in shooting. It's going to make those units incredibly hard to shift, particularly the Chaos Warriors. Those are just going to turn into this crazy, impossible to move block. Similarly, the Harbinger of Decay giving 5-up after save to all of your mortal units. That's really, really strong. Again, that just piles on to the Chaos Warrior Anvil. It makes warriors more survivable. It makes your knights more survivable. Most of what you have in Slaves to Darkness is all mortal, and all the Harbinger of Decay requires is that mortal keyword to get the buffs if they're also marked Nurgle. So that's really key, I think. One of the hot picks that I think would be really fun to do, I don't know if this is necessarily a top tier choice, but taking Horticulus Slimux. Why take Horticulus Slimux? Well, he gives you a free tree at the start of a turn. Say the start of your first turn. It can be placed within 3 inches of Horticulus. It's got about a 5-inch base, and then it has a 7-inch radius. So that's taking you out 14 inches. So you could do something like take a unit of Chaos Knights, run them. Now they're moving, I believe, 17 up. If you just have a couple of guys trail back just a little bit, then they're going to still catch that bubble off of the Feculent Gnarlmaw. So now they'll also be able to run and charge, which is very powerful on a unit that is already fast. And that run and charge is just really powerful. And then if you're also coupling that with either your Chaos Lord on Demonic Mount or your Chaos Lord on Kekadrak, then you're also re-rolling your charges on them, and they are +1 to hit. So they are going to be getting very reliable charges with, just hitting like a ton of bricks on the charge. You can really alpha strike with those if you're using Horticulus Slimux in your list and getting that Feculent Gnarlmaw, which, I mean, how off guard are your opponents also going to be taken when you're running a Slaves to Darkness list and a Feculent Gnarlmaw just pops up out of nowhere on them? I think that's going to be, it would just be a fun thing to do. And I think it's also going to it in casual games, like, that can be a crazy powerful thing to do too. So I like it. I don't think it's like top tables competitive, but it's a cool interaction. Um, Plague drones also just get buffed by having a Nurgle demon hero near them, and that's on their own war scroll. And what are you going to be running in like every Nurgle Slaves to Darkness list? A Nurgle Demon Prince who is fast and flies and can follow your plague drones around, or your plague drones can follow him around to get that extra buff to their attacks, um, just for being near him. An honorable mention here is the Glotkin. Now, he's currently 420 points, which means you'd have to be playing a 2,500 point game to ally him in. But also, in a more casual game, you might just, your opponent might just be okay with it if you bring him in, even though you're 20 points over on your allies, or you're just playing, more of an open play game. He's going to be great for just buffing the offense of all of your guys, as well as using his spell to buff the defense. So he's got a lot of assets to throw in there, especially on things like, again, Chaos Warriors, just making them even more of a sticky anvil. And then, of course, I can't round this out without mentioning that you can fit 10 Blight Kings into your allies in a 2,000 point list. And when you compare Blight Kings to everything else that Slaves to Darkness has to offer, it sort of starts becoming like this benchmark of how you compare everything. And I feel like that's kind of a separate video altogether of, in the Maggotkin book, how you end up with this like Putrid Blight King standard that every other unit in the army has to kind of be able to match up to Putrid Blight Kings, and if they don't, then you just run more Blight Kings. And I've seen lists with 35, and I don't think those lists are bad, because Blight Kings are a strong hammer and a strong anvil, and they have two good battalions that run them, but that's beside the point. So now, looking in the other direction, there's not really anything in, well, let me rephrase that. Your Slaves to Darkness heroes, and also the War Shrine, things that are going to be buffing your units, they've made those all insular into Slaves to Darkness. So what that does is all of the heroes out of Slaves to Darkness that you're going to be using in a Nurgle army, you're generally going to want to run those as a power pair with some other unit out of Slaves to Darkness. Great examples: either taking a unit of Chaos Warriors or a unit of Chaos Marauders, pairing them with a Nurgle Demon Prince, and using them as an anvil unit that's kicking back a lot of mortal wounds at your opponent. You can couple your Chaos Warriors with a Chaos War Shrine to make them even more of an anvil, even higher defense. Let's see, your Chaos Knights, as I mentioned, in the other way around, using things out of the Nurgle book to synergize with your Chaos Knights. You can use your Chaos Knights and one of your two mounted lords in the Nurgle book for a really fast hammer. Now, are they an overly powerful hammer? That's sort of up in the air for a question. But if you're running them in the Maggotkin Allegiance, you also have the ability to throw Blades of Putrefaction on them, which is still not an unmodified 6. So if you give them the +1 to hit from either the Lord on Demonic Mount or Lord on Kakadrak, that means that Blades of Putrefaction is going to be triggering on 5s, which is really powerful. That's going to just turn them into shredders when you actually get that spell off. Now, it goes off on a 7, so it's not the most reliable thing, but it's going to happen often enough that your going to get a lot of mileage out of it. And you can very easily, if you don't get it off on your first turn, you can just hold your Chaos Knights back and then charge with them once you actually get that spell off. I think even the Demon Prince just solo is good because his aura will include himself. So he's going to be kicking back mortal wounds onto your opponent on their 6s to hit, even when he's just by himself. So you can just kind of YOLO him in and maybe take an artifact out of whatever realm you're in to buff him further, either to make him more survivable or to make him more powerful on offense. Now, of particular note here, I looked again through the artifact list for Nurgle as well as the command trait list. There's nothing exciting there to put on a Demon Prince. In fact, one of your options is the Witherstave, which is like the biggest Nambo with his command ability ever, so don't do that. It looks appealing to have this 12-inch fly guy have the Witherstave, but don't do it because then his command ability becomes worthless. But I digress. A really interesting one out of this is your Chaos Sorcerer Lord on Manticore. Now, I have seen a bunch of Nurgle players up to now running the Vermin Lord Corruptor for his spell because it's a great horde killer spell. Now, with the Chaos Sorcerer Lord on Manticore, you're getting a very, very similar spell that on average, the math works out to being the same level of horde killing. It's just more swingy. They both have the same casting value, but your Sorcerer Lord on Manticore is 40 points cheaper than your Vermin Lord Corruptor. So you're getting a cheaper version of the same thing. And let's face it, you don't want to get either of them into combat just because you don't want to get them into combat because you want to be able to use those spells. And the Lord on Manticore, his spell range is longer. So you're going to be able to keep him back more than your Vermin Lord Corruptor. Downside to this is that the Vermin Lord Corruptor has the Skaven keyword. So if you're playing against a Skaven opponent, you would be able to stick him next to a gnaw hole and it would effectively be arcane, but we don't need that. That's even more rolling the dice than like having an arcane piece of terrain on the table. So it's fine. I don't think that really factors into the math in any significant way. I think if you're going for, I want a horde killer spell wizard, you're probably going to go Chaos Lord on Manticore and not your Vermin Lord Corruptor. The Vermin Lord Corruptor is a double caster, but it's a question as to are his spells in conjunction with that actually going to be what you want with him. He doesn't necessarily have the most synergistic spells available, so I think your second spell is just going to be Arcane Bolt or Mystic Shield like a lot. And if it's going to be Mystic Shield, then you have Oracular Visions, which is the same shit anyway. So, in general, I think there's a lot of good options to bring across. I think you're going to be doing a lot of power pairing. You can bring a big block of Chaos Warriors and either have them backed up with a Demon Prince or a War Shrine or a Chaos Lord, depending on which way of anvil-iness you want to go. You can do a similar thing with Marauders, except they're a little bit more of like a glass cannon-y kind of anvil, where you're bringing them in, but you want your opponent to attack you, you want your guys to die, etc., etc. But they're holding up your opponent in the process because there's just going to be a big block of like 20 or 40 of them. So they're going to hold up your opponent for quite a while. A really fun one is the Exalted Hero of Chaos. Um, and I think he's fun just within Slaves to Darkness as well. But if you give him the Sword of Judgment, he's getting, against a hero, he's getting a double pile in with d6 attacks each. So you're making 2d6 attacks. Any sixes turn into d6 mortal wounds, and he's +1 to hit when he charges against heroes. So it turns into fives are d6s against heroes. So on average, you're going to be rolling 2d6 mortal wounds against heroes with your Exalted Hero of Chaos. And he's only 90 points. So when you get into those weird positions where you're like, I have this odd amount of points left in my list and I can't quite fit this, I can't quite fit that. Exalted Hero of Chaos with a Sword of Judgment is just a really fun thing to do. He's this really like little unassuming guy, and he runs in and he just blows up monsters. If you're doing 2d6 attacks and you're triggering d6 mortal wounds on a 5-up, that means you're going to average seven mortal wounds on whatever you're attacking. And with a little bit of good rolling, you're taking down 12 wound monsters. Like, it's possible. It's not necessarily likely. A lot of them have a save against mortal wounds, but he has other attacks that are going through as well. But yeah, he could be a killer of monsters, a killer of important heroes. He can sneak and snake his way through because your opponent doesn't want to get into combat with him because they might not kill him, or they're going after higher priority things. Even if you tell them what he does or they know what he does, they might just kind of lapse mentally and miss this little guy that's going to snake in and kill all of their heroes. So he's a lot of fun. So I've used him in Nurgle before, by the way. Again, just a lot of fun. Your Chaos War Shrine is great with any combination of things. Chaos Knights in combination with a Mounted Lord, either on Kakadrak or on Demonic Mount. Either one, the thing you really care about there is the command ability. So your only differentiation between those two lords is, do I want one that's more of just a support piece? Then you go with Lord on Demonic Mount. If you want him to also be himself an offensive piece, then you go with the Lord on Kakadrak. If you want Rule of Cool, you go with the Lord on Kakadrak because he's just cool. One that I have to say, like, when you're throwing Nurgle into the equation, I feel like the one that just falls completely flat is Chaos Chosen. I feel like Blight Kings are just straight up better than Chosen are for 20 more points for 5. Like, you're getting more than double the wounds, you're getting more attacks, you're losing the mortal wounds, but you're getting exploding 6s instead. The Chosen have Rend, but if you're running Blight Cyst, then you have Rend with Blight Kings. So if you're running a Nurgle marked force, I almost feel like it's better to use Blight Kings than Chosen. There's, I'm sure, other things that I'm missing in my head that might make Chosen better in a Slaves to Darkness Nurgle force than allying in Blight Kings, because I don't feel like allying in Blight Kings, if you're going the Nurgle route, other than thematically, I don't think it matters. Like, there might just be more cost-effective offensive options than Blight Kings. Anyway, I mean, that's really it. There's not... I don't want to say there's not a lot that kind of goes back and forth, but whether you choose a Maggotkin army or a Slaves to Darkness Nurgle army, you could certainly mix things back and forth. And I think it's a really good opportunity for newer players to grab stuff that they could use in both armies. or have kind of like more options, where you can build out, this Slaves to Darkness army, and then, oh, I like marking everything Nurgle. I can grab some, Blight Kings or Puscoils or a couple of these heroes that work well in my Slaves to Darkness force and have it all start working together and be still cohesive, but I'm starting to dip into another army. I think it's a really good opportunity for that. I think if you are playing um, out of the Maggotkin book, it's very cheap, easy, and effective to dip into Slaves to Darkness as well. The Start Collecting box is very inexpensive for all of the stuff that you get in it. If you buy two of the Slaves to Darkness Start Collecting boxes and sell off one of the Cacodrak's or trade it to somebody, whatever, you don't need two of them. Now you've got, I believe, 20 Chaos Warriors, a mounted Lord, and 10 Chaos Knights. Like, that is a really strong anvil and a really strong hammer to be bringing into a Nurgle force. So I think in general they're really good. I think it adds a lot of extra power into what you're doing with Nurgle. I think I'm always very hesitant to recommend Puscoils to people. I think they're very good personally. I've done the math on them. They are good. Like, they're a lot better than people give them credit for. I think the Chaos Knights, though, are in particular, they're going to just combo well. They're a little bit easier to use. They're less expensive on points, although you need to run a power pair with them to make them really good. Or really, in Nurgle, you have to kind of run a mounted Lord and a Maggotkin sorcerer to get Blades of Putrefaction to, get them buffed up and then make their charges. But even without that, if you're just using lances, I think they're still really powerful. Anyway, that's about it on comboing your Nurgle Slaves to Darkness and your Maggotkin and how you can kind of work those two together. Hopefully that was helpful to some people. I'm really hesitant to do this with other factions. Khorne, I think you could probably do this fairly easily with. Tzeentch, we have a new book coming out, and as far as we go with Slaanesh, I feel like even like post FAQ changes, Slaanesh is still very like linear in how it builds, and it wouldn't really want to bring in very much out of the Slaves to Darkness book. And the Slaanesh marked abilities are just like, Nurgle is like the number one mark to take out of Slaves to Darkness by like a lot. And some of that's probably going to be shaved back in an FAQ. But Slaanesh is definitely not nearly as powerful. So with that, like, just having generic mortal bodies in Slaanesh, I don't think really does the work for you. If you want your Daemonettes, you want your Hellstriders, you want your Keepers of Secrets and your Chariots, and none of this stuff out of Slaves to Darkness is going to be summonable in Slaanesh, and bringing stuff in with summoning is kind of the key. So with that kind of like linear build in mind, I think people are going to go a lot more for the demon side of Slaanesh, as well as running your Beasts of Chaos in Slaanesh. Like, that battalion is really powerful, and is just very much in line with what Slaanesh does. Like, I feel like if we had something that really made Chaos Knights or Chaos Chariots really powerful, out of Slaves to Darkness when they're marked Slanesh, like that would that would maybe be something, but we don't really so much have that. Like I don't think we're going to be really bringing it in that direction. So the only one I would really think about, even really talking about, is Corn. Um, I might do that at a later date. I'm not doing that at the moment. I'm trying to stick more to the armies that I'm really familiar with. I don't want to be giving people advice just talking out of my ass. So, um, Nurgle, I know some things about. Slaves to Darkness, I indirectly now know some things about. So, those things were kind of already there. Um, I think your units, the overall picture, I think, is bringing Slaves to Darkness into Nurgle before had a certain value. You were still bringing in power pairs and all of those sorts of things. I think all of those options with the new Slaves to Darkness book, they all got better. Like nothing was really neutral or got worse. The only thing I can really think of is Marauders. I think they went up in quality, but they also got more expensive. So that trade off between Marauders and Plague Bearers, I feel like got weird. And I would have to kind of math out exactly which one is going to be the preferable Anvil unit. Or not Anvil, but just like mass bodies. The Plague Bearers are really more of an Anvil unit. Marauders are just bodies. Your opponent's going to chew through, say, 40 wounds to get anywhere. Anyway, I think I'm going to end things there. Hope you all have learned a little bit. I know I've learned something too. I'll talk to you all later.